Hi, this is Drew Tignanelli. This is our April update, and markets are still kind of hanging in there.
Yeah.
Had a little hiccup in, February, and came back in March. Actually went even a little higher, and now they're kind of relaxing. But that's what markets do. Markets always do that kind of stuff.
Now, we have some market stuff, and we've got some other great topics to talk about. But something that you brought up that we should really put at the top of the hour is tax returns this year. So this is the April video. When you get this video, normally you would have thought you had 2 or 3 weeks left to file, but actually you're going to have a month and change left to file this year.
But there's a couple things. So number one, the filing deadline and the payment is not due until May 17th, okay? And for Maryland, it's July 15th. But if you owe estimated taxes, they want the first one by April 15th. Now, just that alone is confusing.
because you need to prepare your tax return
to understand
what your
estimated taxes are. Now, there are strategies to deal with that, but just I'm not going to go into this because we don't have enough time. But anyway, May 17th is the filing of the Fed deadline and paying your taxes. But if you owe estimated tax, you got to do it before April 15th. And Maryland is July 15th to file and pay taxes. But the first estimated tax for Maryland is April, and the second one is June.
Right.
And they didn't give a delay on the estimated taxes for 2021. So go figure. There's a couple other things too. This is probably the most daunting tax year to try to figure out what to do. And there's no way that TurboTax or some other tax software program, because we have one of the most sophisticated ones, and it doesn't do what you need it to do.
Even some tax preparers I've talked to have said some of the stuff we're worrying about, they just have given up.
Yeah, well, if you're not concerned, and there are a lot of preparers that never worried about this stuff anyway, so they gave up years ago, period. But married filing separate for married couples who make between, say, $150 and $250, married filing separate becomes an incredible issue. If you had unemployment insurance, married filing separate could be a very important issue. Doing IRA deductions and doing HSAs if you haven't funded your full HSA, doing I-401ks and SEPs could be critical if it drops that income below 150. And just take the unemployment compensation. Unemployment compensation, no matter what type of household you are, is $10,200 tax-free to each individual per person, but only if your income doesn't go over $150,001.
No matter what your filing status.
No matter what your filing status, married filing separate, married filing single, married filing separate, married filing joint, single, or head of household, it's $150,000, and it's a cliff. You hit that, boom, you're out. And
so we're not going to accomplish teaching everybody what these things are, but the point of the message is that this is
a year. Get your return to us to review. It's very important that we look at it and help you make sure that you're not missing something. Don't file the return either, because last thing you want to do is file that return and then we find something that could change, and now next thing you know, your stimulus check could be seriously impacted by that.
Right.
So anyway, it's a difficult year for filing taxes, and these tax programs and tax preparers are just throwing their hands up and saying, look, we can't deal with it. It's up to you to figure that out.
So for today, we have 3 major topics that basically span us from a market update into kind of a financial planning topic. And these 3 topics are the things that Drew and I are hearing the most right now on the news, or people talking about them, where they're getting a little bit misled. The news or somebody you're talking to may be telling you correct data, but that data is being presented in a way to mislead you. So the first thing is everybody's talking about inflation and interest rates. And I think one of the important things to know is just where are we? So currently the February annualized inflation rate was 1.3%. And just to give everyone perspective on that, that interest rate is there compared to early 2020, the year of 2019, where it was around 2.3%. So inflation, do we know what's going to happen with inflation? No,
There's some sectors that are having some inflation definitely in it, such as the construction sector. But at this point in time, it's not runaway inflation in any way, shape, or form.
Inflation is currently low. The other thing to talk about is interest rates. Lots of talk about interest rates going up, coming down. Well, the 3-month Treasury is still at 0.01%, basically zero. So the Federal Reserve has committed
For at least a few years.
to lower interest rates.
Keep them low.
To keep them low. Committed to the lower interest rates, not lowering them. So that being said, that doesn't mean the interest rates across the board in your world have stayed the same. Mortgage interest rates have gone up. But again,
they're still lower than they've been before 2020 ever.
They're unreasonably
in the history of the history of the United States.
So you can probably give some much longer term interest rate information, but just to put everyone in perspective to where we are today, January 7th was the low interest rate for average mortgages, as I think I pulled this from Freddie Mac, 2.65%. So that was the low. Where are we today? Well, that same data is at 3.09%. So not hugely different. It's higher. I mean, everybody wants to brag at the dinner party of what their mortgage rate they secured was, but one way or another, you're doing pretty good. You go back just as recent as November of 18, and we were at 4.94%, and then that's still nothing compared to what interest rates.
When I first bought my house, it was 13% in 1981, very first house I bought.
And you thought that was a deal?
At
the time,
At the time, I thought that was the best I could get,
So perspective is always important, especially when watching the news or hearing people talk about, the next big wave of badness that's coming. So the other topic, Drew, that we're hearing a lot about, and I think everybody's talking about, is housing.
Yeah, housing prices have gone up, and they're definitely strong, but this is totally different than 2008. In 2008, the housing bubble was built on fake, debt, that easy money.
Right.
You could go to a mortgage broker and you could say, "Hey, I want to buy this house for $400,000, and I make $40,000," and the mortgage broker would figure out what you had to do to get that house, and then they'd get an appraiser to value it at $450,000 or whatever they needed.
And all you had to do is promise to start a lemonade stand.
And all you had to do is promise something, write something, and that was all there is. In this market, I just recently got a mortgage on a house, and it took me 8 weeks to prove that I was perfectly qualified. And the mortgage I was taking out, compared to my numbers, was ridiculously conservative.
Sure.
And yet, they put me through the ringers for this.
Yeah. So let's talk about the data. Let's talk about, so we've said what isn't causing a problem. Let's talk about what the real situation is. If we look at home sales, so we're shooting this at the end of March for April. Big news the other day was home sales were down 6.6%. Okay, great news line. What does the data really say? Well, if you go back to 18 February, there was 5.61 existing home sales. 19, 5.51 million. 2020, 5.7 million. 2021, February 2021, this big headline of home sales going down, 6.22 million. Yes, it went down 6% from last month, but it's still seasonally higher. So wait a minute. Sales have gone up. Why is everyone saying that prices are soaring because there's no supply? Well, the demand went up greatly, and the supply went up a little. That's the problem. That's what's driving prices. Well, I pulled a number from the National Real Estate Association that says that in the prior trailing 12 months to, the article was probably written a few weeks ago, home prices national average has gone up by 16%. And basically, the real story is the demand, the number of people who now want to purchase another home, is outpacing the number of people willing to sell their home.
Johnny came out of the basement.
Johnny came out of the basement. Johnny, little Johnny, who we thought was never going to sprout, never gonna.
Yeah, well, he got married, and he said, "Well, I can't ask her."
He was locked in the basement all year with his parents, and he's like, "I'm out of here."
There's a lot of people lived in the city. There's a lot of young people who were living with their parents, And they now are getting to that place where they're saying, I want to own a house and I want to own it out in the suburbs or whatever. And boom, demand shoots through the roof and supply does not keep up with it, and you get really strong.
We're all nesting. We're all valuing our homes a
But
little
the
bit more
good
than we
news
did
is,
here.
Mike, is that people are not able to borrow money unconditionally. And that means that these are real home prices. These are not overly inflated home prices.
Right.
These are realistic numbers. That doesn't mean it isn't going to come down, maybe a tad, but I'm not going to bet on it.
Well, I'm always giving you a hard time when you make predictions, but what I will say is that through doing a lot of reading on various sources on this topic, it does look like, though the prices have gone up, there's a lot of support that the fact that the demand drove it, that while we don't know exactly what will happen with home prices, we don't anticipate any significant drop.
No, shouldn't expect that. Then we have lastly,
everybody is talking about President Biden's administration and changes coming to estate tax law. And I mean, estate attorneys with good marketing companies are driving everybody into their lawyer's office. You got a gift away now. You got to form complex trust. Rush right now. But what's the truth in the matter?
well, the truth in the matter, first off, is there is no tax law passed, and it's easy for a new administration to come in and pass a bill to give away $2 trillion. It's very difficult to pass a bill with the House and the Senate, as tight as they are right now, that's going to raise taxes.
Right.
It's just not going to happen that easily.
But let's put some of this tax. So the estate tax is when you die, and normally it's when the second spouse in a married couple dies, and they're worth a certain amount of money. And an amount of money over a certain threshold, the federal government says, hey, if you die with this much money in your name, we'd like a section of it. So you go back to 2004, 2005, we were talking about 1.5 million per person. You go all the way up to the, lower teens, 2013, 5.2 million, 5,250,000. A big change happened in 2018. In 2017, the rate was about 5.5 million that each person could die with and not pay any estate tax. And the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, and that number basically almost doubled to $11.1 million, $11.2 million. That law is set to expire in 2026, which, if nothing else is done, that number will come back down to 5.5 or 5.6 million. It technically had adjusted up to 5.6.
Depends on what inflation does between now and 2026. Yeah.
So let's just say this to start off with. If you are not pretty confident of that you and your spouse are going to die with $10+ million, we might not need to get upset about this. If you and your spouse or you alone are going to die with more than 5 million, or you and a spouse are going to die with more than 10 million, we need to pay attention. There is nothing right now that would drive anyone to rush to action unless they were in those 30, 40, 50 million dollar categories where maybe it's worthwhile considering
if somebody's
action.
worth 40 or 50 million, there's things that they should think about doing. There's no doubt. Think about doing. And but if you're worth 10, 15 million, the one thing that you should definitely think about is a survivor life insurance policy inside a life insurance trust. So there are things to think about, but it's not, I never panic over talk. Yep. Talk is cheap. And gosh, there's nothing better than a politician to talk.
Yeah, and that's reminding me. A number that I keep hearing get tossed around is the $3.5 million estate tax. Biden, in his campaign, pandered a little bit with some of that, but nobody close to him is thinking that he's going to do that. But the other big thing I just want to make sure everybody gets a hold of through this is, if you're like 50 or 60 years old, unless you got a big medical issue, we got a number of politicians for you to go through and their changes to the estate law before you die.
Every time we wake up, there's a new change to the law.
There's a new change to the law.
Anyway, we got to wrap it up, Mikey.
Yep.
We're running late, and this is Drew Tignanelli saying God bless.